When my husband, Richard, passed away, the house became too quiet. Even the ticking of the old clock in the hallway sounded louder, heavier, as if time itself was mocking me. I used to complain about the noise he made, his coughs, his shuffling steps, the way he always hummed out of tune. But when all that vanished, I realized how much life those sounds carried. I spent days wandering from room to room, touching his belongings, trying to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. Grief has a strange way of distorting time. One afternoon feels endless, while a whole week can disappear without warning. My daughter insisted I hire help, someone to cook and keep the house in order. I resisted at first. The idea of a stranger walking through the same halls Richard once filled with laughter felt wrong. But loneliness is a stubborn thing. It wears you down in silence. That's how Clara entered my life. A quiet young woman in her late 20s, with soft brown hair and eyes that carried a sadness I couldn't quite place. She didn't talk much, but there was something familiar about her presence, like a melody I'd heard before, but couldn't remember where. She worked carefully, respectfully, almost as if she feared breaking something invisible between us. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when I caught her looking at Richard's portrait in the living room, her eyes filled with emotion. Once, I even saw tears welling up, though she quickly turned away when she noticed me watching. I asked her once if she knew him, and she smiled awkwardly, saying, "Everyone in this town knew Mr. Harris." It was such a simple answer. Too simple. Something inside me stirred, a whisper of curiosity mixed with unease. Why did her voice tremble when she said his name? Why did she flinch when I mentioned his favorite book or his old typewriter? I told myself I was just being paranoid, that grief was making me see ghosts. But deep down I knew the silence Richard left behind was not empty, it was hiding something. A week after Clara started working here, I finally gathered the courage to enter Richard's study. I hadn't set foot there since the funeral. The air was thick with dust and memories. His smell, old books and aftershave, still lingered. Everything was just as he left it. Papers stacked neatly, a mug half filled with pens, and that heavy mahogany desk he loved so much. For years, he spent evenings there, writing in silence while I read in the next room. I used to tease him, saying he must be keeping a secret novel. When I opened the first drawer, I expected nothing but bills and receipts. Instead, I found a small photograph, faded at the edges, tucked inside an old envelope. It showed Richard, younger by at least 20 years, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. But what caught my breath wasn't the woman. It was the little girl in front of them. She couldn't have been older than 4. Her hair was light brown, her smile uncertain. There was something hauntingly familiar about those eyes. For a long time, I just stood there, staring. My fingers trembled as I turned the photo over. On the back, in Richard's handwriting, were 4 words: Summer, 1996, my heart. I felt my chest tighten, and a strange chill ran through me. My first thought was jealousy, but then confusion took over. Why had he hidden it? Who were they? That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl's face, and those eyes that seemed to look right through me. The next morning, when Clara arrived, I watched her more closely. The curve of her jaw, the way she smiled politely, the color of her hair, it all began to echo that photograph. I wanted to ask her directly, but fear stopped me. What if I was wrong? What if I sounded like a bitter old widow imagining things? So instead, I tucked the photo back where I found it and tried to go about my day. But something had changed. I could no longer see Clara as just a stranger. Each gesture, each word she spoke, now carried a new weight, a silent question I was too afraid to ask. 2 days later, a storm rolled over the town. The wind howled through the chimney, and rain drummed against the windows like impatient fingers. Clara had already gone home early, worried the roads might flood. I was alone again, surrounded by the sound of thunder and my thoughts. The photograph haunted me still, and something inside whispered that I needed to look deeper, that Richard had left behind more than memories. I returned to his study that night with a candle and a determination I hadn't felt in years. The air was colder, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I started pulling open drawers, moving books, searching for something I couldn't name. When I reached for the lower shelf of the bookcase, my hand brushed against the back panel, and it moved. My heart skipped. Behind the loose wood was a small compartment, no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in an old silk scarf, was a black leather journal. Its edges were cracked, and the initials RH were engraved in gold. My hands trembled as I lifted it, feeling the weight of years and secrets. The first page bore his handwriting, firm, elegant, unmistakable. "If you're reading this, my love," it began. "Then I failed to tell you something while I was still alive." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like his voice was echoing from the pages. He wrote about guilt, about mistakes that had followed him like shadows. "There are things I did not have the courage to face," he confessed. "And someone who carries my blood lives unaware of who she truly is." The words blurred before my eyes. I pressed the journal to my chest, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the storm outside. I didn't read further that night. I couldn't. The thought that Richard, a man I trusted with every part of my soul, had hidden something so monumental made me dizzy. I placed the journal on the desk, staring at it as if it were alive. Every instinct told me that once I opened it again, nothing in my life would ever be the same. I didn't sleep that night. The journal sat on the table beside my bed like a living thing, whispering in the dark. By morning, curiosity had devoured my fear. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and opened it again. The first few pages were dated, entries spanning over 25 years. His words were intimate, written with the tenderness of a man confessing not to a page, but to a conscience. He wrote about his loneliness during business trips, about mistakes made in younger years, about guilt that gnawed at him quietly. Then, halfway through, I found the entry that changed everything. It was dated June 12th, 1996. "Her name is Laura," he wrote. "She's kind, gentle, nothing like the chaos I feel inside. I know I'm crossing a line that cannot be undone. But when I look into her eyes, I see something pure, something I lost long ago." My fingers trembled. Laura, the same name on the back of that old photograph. I kept reading, though my chest ached with every word. "She doesn't ask for much," he continued. "Just my company, my promises. But I can't give her my name. My life with Margaret must remain untouched. I can only give her what I can: help, protection, a future for the child." I stopped breathing for a moment. The child. There it was, the confirmation of everything I feared. Richard had another family. Somewhere out there was a child he had loved and kept secret from me for decades. I turned the page and saw one last note, written years later, in shakier handwriting. "She's grown now. I send money through an old friend. Her mother passed when she was a girl. I wish I could tell Margaret, but how could I?" The words felt like knives. I closed the journal, tears spilling onto the leather cover. Every memory of our life together, our anniversaries, our laughter, our quiet nights, suddenly felt tainted by deceit. Yet beneath the pain, another thought began to take shape, one that terrified me more than the betrayal itself: Clara's eyes. Those same gentle eyes from the photograph. Could it be? From that morning on, I couldn't look at Clara the same way. Every time she entered the room, the air seemed to change. I studied her without meaning to. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled, even the way she hummed softly while washing the dishes. Each small habit felt like a thread leading back to Richard. It was as if he had left a piece of himself walking around my house, and she didn't even know it. I tried to dismiss the thought, telling myself it was just coincidence, a projection of my pain. But the resemblance became undeniable. One afternoon, she dropped a tray, and as she bent to pick it up, I noticed the small scar on her hand, the same crescent-shaped mark Richard had, a childhood burn he'd told me about 1,000 times. My heart stopped. I asked her as casually as I could how she got it. She hesitated, then said, "I don't remember. It's been there since I was little." That night, I opened the journal again, searching for any mention of such a mark, and there it was. When she burned her hand on the stove, I thought my heart would break. She looks at me like I can fix anything. My fingers went cold. The words were no longer abstract confessions. They were living proof. Clara was his daughter. But how could I tell her? Should I? The truth was too heavy to share, and yet keeping it felt unbearable. For days, I carried the knowledge like a stone in my chest. I wanted to hate Richard, to curse him for his lies, but I couldn't. Because even in betrayal, there was love, misguided, broken love. Clara must have noticed something was off. One evening, she looked at me while setting the table and asked softly, "Mrs. Harris, have I done something wrong?" Her voice cracked just slightly, and I saw in her eyes the same insecurity that haunted me. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "No, dear," I said, though my throat ached. "You've done nothing wrong." But the truth was eating me alive. The following week, my thoughts became unbearable. Every glance at Clara was a reminder of Richard's hidden life. I needed proof, something that would either destroy my suspicion or confirm the unbearable truth. So one morning, after Clara left for the market, I went into her small room at the back of the house. It felt wrong, intrusive even, but the urge to know the truth drowned any sense of guilt. The room was simple: neatly folded clothes, a small Bible on the nightstand, and an old tin box under the bed. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside were a few childhood photos, some letters, and a worn birth certificate. My hands shook as I lifted the document to the light. Her mother's name, Laura Evans. My knees weakened. I had seen that name before, written in Richard's journal. But what truly broke me was the line below, "Father, unknown." I sank onto the bed, clutching the paper. Tears blurred the ink as memories flashed before me. The years Richard spent traveling for work, the nights he came home quieter than usual, the way he avoided certain topics when I asked too much. All the pieces were finally falling into place, and the picture they formed was devastating. I placed everything back carefully, feeling as though I had trespassed not just into her room, but into her innocence. When Clara returned, I watched her unpack the groceries, humming softly, completely unaware that her entire history had just collided with mine. For a moment, I almost told her everything right then. But how do you tell someone that the man who gave her life is the same one who built yours on lies? That night, I opened Richard's journal one last time, searching for guidance, for an explanation. In the final pages, written shakily just weeks before his death, he confessed, "I've watched her from afar for years. She reminds me of you. Strong, kind, pure. I wish you could meet her, Margaret. You'd see the part of me I always loved most." The words cut deep. He had wanted this meeting, but on his terms. Now it was left to me to decide whether the truth should stay buried or set both of us free. The next morning, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. The house seemed heavier, the walls closer, as if they too were holding secrets. Clara was in the kitchen, humming while preparing breakfast. Her calmness irritated me. It wasn't her fault, but every soft sound she made reminded me of Richard. I stood by the doorway for a long moment, watching her move with the same quiet precision he once had. "Clara," I finally said, my voice softer than I intended. She turned, startled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, Mrs. Harris?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "You mentioned your mother once," I began. "What was she like?" Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough for me to see the sadness behind it. "She was kind," she said after a pause. "She worked hard. I don't remember much of my childhood, but I know she loved me. She died when I was 12. Her eyes drifted toward the window. "She never told me who my father was. I used to ask, but she'd just say he was a good man who made a mistake." The word struck me like lightning. A good man who made a mistake. That was exactly how Richard had described himself in his journal. I forced myself to stay composed. And you never tried to find him?
I asked.
Clara shook her head, giving a small, sad smile.
No.
Some doors are better left closed. I think she wanted it that way. Her tone carried a quiet acceptance that both hurt and comforted me. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand, but inside I was unraveling. The proof was no longer just in documents or ink. It was in her voice, her gentleness, her very being. Richard's blood ran through her veins, and she had been here all along, caring for me, oblivious to the truth that tied us together. As she placed a cup of tea before me, I looked at her and whispered, "You have your father's hands." She smiled faintly, not knowing what I meant. But I did.
And it broke me.
After that morning, something changed between us. Clara began noticing my silences, my distant gaze, the way my words sometimes faltered mid-sentence. I tried to act normal, to hide the storm that brewed inside me, but she was perceptive. Too perceptive. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, she asked gently, "Mrs. Harris, do you ever feel like life brings people together for a reason?" I froze. The question hung in the air, heavy and trembling, like a confession disguised as curiosity. I looked at her, unsure how to respond. "Perhaps," I said finally. "Sometimes the universe weaves threads we don't understand until it's too late." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "That's how I feel about being here," she said. "It's strange, but from the first day I came, it felt familiar. Like I'd been here before." Her words pierced me deeper than she could imagine. Familiar. She was part of this house, part of Richard, part of me, and yet she didn't know. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand and tell her everything, but fear chained me to silence. What if the truth shattered her? What if it destroyed the fragile peace we had built together? That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat at my window, watching the rain trace lines down the glass, and thought about how truth can be both a cure and a curse. Richard had carried his secret for decades, and now it was mine to bear. For the first time, I understood the loneliness he must have felt, the quiet torment of loving two people and betraying them both by keeping them apart. When morning came, Clara found me already awake. She brought me breakfast, her kindness unwavering. "You remind me of someone," she said softly, placing the tray down. "Someone I never met, but always felt close to. My mother used to say if I ever found that person, I'd know." Our eyes met, and for a brief, electric moment, I felt she already did. She just didn't have the words for it yet. For days, I carried the truth like a ghost following me through every room. It sat beside me at breakfast, lingered in the corners of Richard's study, and whispered in my ear when I tried to sleep. I could no longer pretend that silence was kindness. Each time Clara smiled at me, the guilt pressed heavier against my chest. So one afternoon, I took a sheet of paper, sat at Richard's old desk, and began to write. "My dearest Clara," I started. The words looked fragile on the page, as if they might crumble under their own weight. "There's something I need to tell you, something your mother couldn't and your father never did." My hand trembled as I wrote those lines. It felt wrong to use the word father, yet it was the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, has its own right to live. I wrote about the photograph, the journal, the confession. I told her that none of it was her fault, that she had every right to know who she was. But when I reached the sentence, "Your father was Richard Harris," I stopped. My pen hovered above the paper, refusing to move. How could I put in ink what I still couldn't say aloud? What would it do to her, to us, if she knew? I folded the half-written letter and placed it inside Richard's journal. My heart ached with the memory of him, his laughter, his flaws, his humanity. I loved him once for his strength, but now I pitied him for his fear. And perhaps I realized I was no different. I was just another coward, hiding behind the walls of love. That night, I dreamed of Clara as a little girl, standing in the garden, calling out to someone I couldn't see. When I reached for her, she turned and whispered, "It's not too late to tell me." I woke up trembling, the letter still unfinished, but the decision no longer mine alone. The past was coming for both of us, whether we were ready or not. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The air smelled of rain and lavender, and the whole house seemed unusually still. I had gone to the garden to tend to Richard's roses, something I hadn't done in months. When I came back inside, I found Clara in the study. The door was slightly open, and I could hear the soft rustle of paper. My heart froze. I knew instantly what she had found. She was sitting at the desk, Richard's journal open before her. Her hands trembled as she read, her eyes wide, darting across the pages like someone desperately searching for a different ending. I stood there in silence, watching the truth unravel her world just as it had shattered mine. The letter I'd written was still tucked inside, half hidden between the pages. And she found that, too. Mrs. Harris, her voice was barely a whisper, shaking. "Is this true?" I stepped forward, unable to speak. My throat closed, my heart pounded painfully against my ribs. Tears glistened in her eyes as she held the paper with both hands. He was my father, wasn't he? I wanted to deny it, to protect her from the pain that truth brings. But I saw myself in her, the same confusion, the same heartbreak. So I nodded slowly, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I whispered.
He was.
For a long time she didn't move. The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock, marking the death of every illusion we'd both lived under. Then, without a word, she walked to the window, staring out at the rain. "I thought I didn't need to know," she said finally. "But now everything makes sense. Why this house felt familiar. Why you felt familiar." I took a step closer, my voice trembling. "He loved you, Clara. In his own broken way, he did." She turned to me then, her eyes filled with tears, but there was no hatred, only sorrow. "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you?" I couldn't speak. I simply reached for her hand, and for the first time, neither of us pulled away. The days that followed were heavy, wrapped in a silence that felt almost sacred. Clara still came to the house, but everything between us had changed. She moved quietly, avoiding my gaze, her presence now a reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained without meaning to. I wanted to speak, to explain, but every word felt inadequate against the weight of truth. At breakfast, the clinking of cups sounded louder than ever. Once, we had filled those mornings with soft conversation, her asking about Richard's old books, me telling her small stories from my youth. Now, there was only the echo of what used to be. I noticed her eyes often drifting toward his portrait on the wall. She no longer looked at it with curiosity, but with grief, the kind that comes when a dream dissolves into reality. Sometimes, I'd find her in the garden, sitting beside the roses Richard planted years ago. She didn't cry, at least not where I could see. But there was a stillness in her that hurt to watch. One afternoon, I brought her tea, setting it down beside her without saying a word. She looked up at me and managed a faint smile. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, an unspoken truce held together by shared pain. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I reread the last pages of Richard's journal. His final words echoed differently now. "One day, I hope they both find each other, and through their meeting, find me." I understood, finally, that this, our suffering, our confusion, was what he meant by finding him. In loving or hating him, in confronting what he hid, we were both keeping him alive in our own ways. Grief and love are strange companions. They twist together until you can't tell one from the other. I wanted to hate Richard for his weakness, but as I looked at Clara's gentle face in my memory, I realized that what he left behind wasn't just betrayal, it was also a chance. A chance to turn something broken into something human again. It was late autumn when it happened. The mornings had grown colder, and Clara had been coughing for days, insisting it was nothing but the weather. I should have noticed sooner how pale she'd become, how tired her steps sounded as she moved around the house. That morning, I called her name and heard no answer. I found her in the garden, collapsed beside Richard's roses, her skin as white as the clouds above.
Panic seized me.
I shouted for help, my hands trembling as I lifted her head. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was gone. "Clara," I cried, my voice breaking. She stirred weakly, her lips whispering something I couldn't catch. I called the ambulance, and the wait felt like an eternity. The silence between us that had lasted for weeks was now replaced by fear, raw, consuming fear of losing her before I could make things right. At the hospital, the doctor said it was pneumonia, worsened by exhaustion. "She's strong," he told me, "but she needs rest, and someone who cares for her." I sat by her bed all night, watching her chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile promise. I held her hand and whispered words I had been too afraid to speak before. "I'm sorry, Clara. For everything, for what he did, for what I didn't say, for the pain you didn't deserve." When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, she looked at me with a faint smile. "You stayed," she said softly. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Of course I did," I whispered. "Your family." The word felt strange on my tongue, both painful and healing. For the first time since the truth surfaced, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a beginning. Over the next few days, I visited her daily, bringing soup, flowers, and the quiet comfort of presence. We didn't talk much about the past, but something unspoken shifted between us. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. It often comes in silence, in shared moments of care, in the decision to stay when walking away would be easier. When Clara finally came home, the house no longer felt like the same place where everything had fallen apart. The air was softer, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I had spent the days before her return cleaning every corner, replacing the flowers, and even cooking her favorite soup. It wasn't just about making her comfortable, it was my way of saying I want you here. She walked through the door slowly, her steps uncertain, her face thinner but her eyes brighter. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, smiling gently as she looked around. "I wanted to," I replied. "This house has seen too much silence. It's time it hears laughter again." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she hugged me. It was brief, careful, but in that small gesture lived everything words had failed to say. The days that followed were quieter, yet warmer. We cooked together, worked in the garden, and sometimes sat by the fireplace reading in comfortable silence. There were still moments when I caught her staring at Richard's portrait, no longer with sadness, but with a kind of distant curiosity, as if she was finally making peace with the man she never truly knew. One evening, she asked, "Do you think he ever wanted us to meet?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said honestly. "But I think he didn't know how to make it happen without breaking us both." She nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected. "Then maybe it happened the only way it could," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Through pain." I smiled faintly. "Pain teaches, Clara. It's cruel, but it brings truth to light." Little by little, the weight between us began to lift. The same house that once suffocated me now echoed with a different kind of silence, the peaceful kind, the one born after forgiveness. The roses Richard planted bloomed again that spring, and when Clara watered them, she whispered, "For him." But when she turned to me, I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't just doing it for him anymore. She was doing it for us. It happened almost by accident. Clara was cleaning the attic one afternoon when she called out for me, her voice echoing through the old wooden beams. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my knees. She stood by a trunk I hadn't opened in years, her hands covered in dust, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Harris," she said softly, "I think you should see this." In her hand was a small envelope, yellowed by time, sealed with wax bearing Richard's initials, R.H. My heart began to race. I took it from her carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, for Margaret and Clara. I felt the world blur around me for a moment. My name, her name, side by side. He had written to both of us. I looked at Clara, who watched me silently, and together we opened it. The letter was dated only a week before his death. "If you're reading this," it began, "then I no longer have the courage to say these words aloud. I have lived a life of love and regret, and you, both of you, are the two halves of my heart. My vision blurred as the words swam before me. Margaret, you gave me a life of meaning, patience, and forgiveness. Clara, you are the proof that love can exist even in the shadow of mistakes. I never meant to hide you from one another. I was only a man, weak, afraid, but never without love. Clara's hands trembled as she held the paper. He wanted us to know, she whispered. I nodded, tears running freely down my cheeks. The pain that had lingered for months began to shift into something softer, something that no longer cut but healed. He was wrong, I said quietly, but maybe this was his way of setting things right. We sat there for hours, saying nothing more. The light from the attic window fell across the page, illuminating his final words. Forgive me, and you'll both find peace. Together. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my chest. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt his presence not as a ghost of guilt, but as a whisper of love, fragile, flawed, and human. Clara reached out and took my hand. We didn't speak, but we didn't need to. The truth had finally come full circle. The morning after we found the letter, the world seemed quieter, not empty, but calm, as if the house itself had finally exhaled. Clara and I sat in the kitchen, sharing coffee without words. Every now and then, our eyes met, and a gentle understanding passed between us. There was no need to revisit the past anymore. It had already spoken through Richard's final words. What mattered now was what we would do with them. After breakfast, I told her, he loved those roses more than anything in this garden. She smiled faintly. Then maybe we should plant something new, something that belongs to us. I felt my throat tighten at her words. It was such a simple idea, and yet it carried the power of a new beginning. That afternoon, we drove to the nursery and chose a single white rose bush. Pure, resilient, timeless. The sky was golden as we planted it, side by side. I dug while Clara held the roots, her hands steady, careful. You know, I said softly, he used to say that roses only bloom where forgiveness lives. She looked up, eyes shining. Then this one will bloom forever. We both smiled through tears, the kind that wash away bitterness and leave only truth behind. When the rose was finally in the ground, we stood in silence, watching the breeze sway its delicate petals. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by Richard's memory. Instead, I felt his presence in the sunlight, in the earth, in the warmth of the hand that gently touched mine. Clara whispered, maybe this was his way of making us family after all. I nodded, unable to speak. The pain had turned into something sacred. That night, as I looked at the garden from my window, I saw the moonlight fall softly on the new rosebush. Its white petals glowed faintly in the dark, a quiet reminder that even in betrayal, love can still take root. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing peace over pain and life over ghosts. And that was exactly what we had done. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the house changed again. Not back to what it once was, but into something gentler, more alive. The shadows that once clung to every corner had lifted. Clara no longer walked softly as if afraid to disturb the past. Now she moved with confidence, humming as she cleaned, laughing quietly when the radio played an old song Richard used to love. It felt as if both of us had finally remembered how to breathe. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the living room, she turned to me and said, I've been thinking. I don't want to leave. My heart warmed at her words, though I tried to keep my composure. You don't have to, I said. This house is room for both of us, and I think it always was meant to. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and I saw the light of something pure in her eyes. Peace. We began to rebuild our lives, not as mistress and caregiver, but as two women connected by fate and forgiveness. Clara took care of the garden, nurturing the new rosebush with almost sacred devotion. I would watch her from the porch, sometimes reading, sometimes just letting the sunlight rest on my face. It was a quiet happiness, the kind born not from perfection, but from survival. One evening, she placed Richard's portrait on the mantel beside the new rose in a vase. "He brought us together," she said softly. "Maybe not the way he should have, but maybe the way we needed." I nodded, my throat tightening with emotion. "He made many mistakes," I said, "but this connection is his redemption." For the first time, speaking his name didn't hurt. It felt like grace. As spring turned into summer, the white rose bloomed wildly, spilling fragrance through the open windows. The house that once felt like a tomb of secrets had become a sanctuary of peace. And every night before bed, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for Richard's forgiveness, but for gratitude. Because through all the pain, I had found a daughter I never knew I had, and she had found a mother she never thought she'd meet. Together, we had turned a hidden truth into a living love. By the time summer deepened into autumn again, the rhythm of our days had become something sacred. I had grown older, slower, perhaps, but not lonely. The silence that once haunted these walls was now filled with life. The sound of Clara's footsteps, her laughter drifting from the garden, the soft clinking of dishes during dinner. She had become more than company. She was the pulse of this home, its quiet heartbeat. I began to notice her taking care of me in small, gentle ways. She would set out my tea before I asked, fold the blankets I forgot in the chair, or remind me to rest when she saw fatigue in my eyes. "You used to take care of him," she'd say, smiling. "Now let me take care of you." There was no pity in her voice, only love, the kind that grows when two souls finally see each other without resentment. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset, its light spilling gold across the garden. Clara joined me, placing a shawl around my shoulders. The roses Richard had planted, and the one we planted together, bloomed side by side, their colors blending in the evening glow. "Do you ever think he sees us?" she asked softly. I looked at the sky, then at her. "If he does," I said, "I think he's finally at peace." We spoke often of legacy, not wealth or inheritance, but memory. "When you're gone," Clara once said, "I'll keep this house. I'll keep the garden, the roses, the stories. I'll keep you." Her words touched something deep inside me. For years, I had feared dying alone, leaving behind nothing but regret. But now, knowing she would remain, not as a caretaker, but as family, that fear vanished. The seasons continued their quiet dance, each one reminding me that life, like love, renews itself if you let it. And sometimes, the greatest redemption doesn't come from changing the past, but from tending to what it left behind. As the night settled in, Clara took my hand gently and I whispered, "You were never his mistake, Clara. You were his gift to me." She squeezed my hand, smiling through tears. "And you," she said, "were his gift to me." Winter had come again, gentle but undeniable. The mornings were colder now, and I found myself moving slower, needing Clara's help more often. Yet, despite the frailty of my body, my heart was lighter than it had been in years. Peace has a way of softening everything, even time. The shadows of betrayal, guilt, and pain had long since faded, leaving only understanding in their place. One afternoon, I sat in Richard's old study, the sunlight spilling through the curtains in warm golden stripes. On the desk rested his journal, the same one that had once shattered my world. I had read it so many times now that I knew every word, every curve of his handwriting. But this time, I opened it not to grieve, but to add something new. On the last page, beneath his final entry, I wrote, "Your secret broke us, but your truth healed us. She is not your sin. She is our salvation." When Clara came in, I called her to me. "I want you to have this," I said, pushing the journal gently toward her. She looked at it as if it were something sacred. "I can't," she whispered. "It's yours." I shook my head, smiling softly.
"No, my dear.
"It's ours. But now, it belongs to you. Promise me you'll keep it, and one day, when you feel the time is right, write your own story in it. Tell it honestly, even the parts that hurt." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I will," she said. "I promise." I reached out and took her hand. Then the truth will never be lost again. For a moment, the air felt still, almost holy. 2 generations of women bound not by blood alone, but by the courage to face love in all its imperfect forms. That night, as she helped me to bed, I looked at her and said, "When I'm gone, don't mourn me.
Keep the garden alive.
Keep the roses blooming." She smiled through her tears. "I will," she whispered. "Every spring, I'll make sure they bloom for you." I closed my eyes, the warmth of her hand still wrapped around mine, and thought, maybe this is what redemption looks like. Not in grand gestures or perfect endings, but in knowing that love, once broken, had found a way to endure. Years have passed since that winter morning when I held Margaret's hand for the last time. The house is quieter now, yet it doesn't feel empty. Every corner carries her presence, her laughter echoing faintly in the hallway, her perfume lingering near the fireplace, her gentle voice reminding me to keep the roses blooming. I've kept that promise. Every spring, they return stronger, their white petals glistening with dew like tears of joy. I still keep Richard's journal on the same desk where Margaret once sat. The leather has softened over time, its pages worn by generations of truth. Sometimes I read his words, but more often I read hers. That single line she left at the end. "She is not your sin. She is our salvation." I never fully understood it until now. Forgiveness isn't about absolving the past, it's about freeing the future. I've added my own words to the journal, as she told me to. Not to rewrite their story, but to continue it. I wrote about how love can take many shapes: a husband's guilt, a mother's grace, a daughter's redemption. And how the things we fear most, truth, pain, vulnerability, are often the things that lead us home. Sometimes, visitors pass by and ask why I've stayed in this old house all these years. I tell them it's because this place isn't made of walls and wood. It's made of memories that learn to forgive each other. The garden, the journal, the portrait above the mantel, they're not relics of sorrow anymore. They're reminders that even the most broken stories can bloom again. As I water the roses each morning, I whisper, "They're blooming for you, Margaret." The wind always answers, soft and warm, brushing against my cheek like a familiar hand. And in that moment, I know she kept her promise too. She never truly left. The house breathes with her spirit, and through it, love continues to grow, honest, flawed, and eternal. It was a warm spring morning when I heard the knock at the gate. I was in the garden, pruning the roses as I always did, the air filled with the scent of earth and life. The sound startled me. Visitors were rare these days. Wiping my hands on my apron, I walked toward the entrance. Standing there was a young woman, perhaps no older than 20, holding a notebook close to her chest. She had kind eyes and a shy smile. "Are you Mrs. Clara Harris?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, uncertain. I nodded, curious. "My grandmother used to work here," she continued. "She told me stories about this house, about 2 women who turned secrets into love. I'm writing a paper for school about forgiveness, and I wanted to see it for myself." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Her words carried the echo of everything Margaret and I had lived for, the legacy we hadn't even realized we were leaving behind. "Come in," I said softly. "You'll find forgiveness grows easily here." She smiled, stepping through the gate as sunlight danced across her hair. I led her through the garden, showing her the white rosebush that had outlived both pain and seasons. "This one was planted for peace," I told her. "Every petal carries a story." She touched one delicately, as if afraid to harm it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "almost like it's still alive." I smiled. "It is. Love doesn't die. It just changes form." Before she left, I gave her something, Richard's journal, now filled with Margaret's and my own writings.
"Share it," I said.
Not as a confession, but as proof that forgiveness is stronger than secrets. She promised she would. As I watched her walk down the path, the wind stirred gently through the roses, their petals shimmering in the light. That evening, I sat by the window, the sunset painting the sky in gold. The house felt full again, not of ghosts, but of continuity. I closed my eyes and heard Margaret's voice in the quiet. Keep the roses blooming. I smiled and whispered back, They are, my dear. And so am I.